For centuries, 99% of humanity has unknowingly infected their own spiritual transmissions with a highly contagious lexical virus. It is a single, seemingly innocent four-letter word that instantly detonates the structural integrity of any prayer, blocking every conceivable miracle before it can even materialize in the physical grid. Joel Goldsmith spent 4 decades analyzing this precise semantic sabotage, discovering that this one word operates as a lethal syntactic poison. It violently severs your connection to the divine source, turning your sovereign birthright into the pathetic pleading of a vibrational beggar. That forbidden word is need. The exact millisecond you broadcast a need into the ether, you trigger a catastrophic frequency dissonance. You are effectively screaming at the universe that an ontological defect exists within the absolute perfection of creation. To beg for healing or financial supply is to mathematically confirm your localized bankruptcy. You are attempting to convince the sun that you are trapped in absolute darkness. It is an acoustic signature of separation that the cosmos simply cannot process. This evening, we will permanently uninstall this corrupted vocabulary from your cognitive architecture. We will introduce the exact cryptographic key that the greatest historical mystics utilized to execute profound reversals in terminal pathology and absolute fiscal ruin. This is not a psychological adjustment. It is the brutal physics of aligning with pre-existing wholeness. Prepare to completely eradicate the language of the spiritual beggar and initialize the protocol of pure, unadulterated recognition. To fully comprehend the catastrophic impact of this semantic sabotage, we must dissect the anatomical structure of the word need. In the realm of spiritual physics, vocabulary is not merely descriptive, it is highly generative. The exact moment your linguistic processor formulates a petition based on need, you are actively constructing an artificial chasm between your localized avatar and the infinite source. You instantly degrade your status from a sovereign operator to a vibrational beggar. The historical architects of advanced consciousness figures, whose operational capacities allowed them to bypass physical laws, instinctively quarantined this word from their transmissions. They understood that uttering a requirement for external intervention is a mathematically precise declaration of a void. It is the ultimate assertion that the divine geometry is somehow fractured and requires your frantic micromanagement to repair. This lexical virus generates a severe frequency dissonance that renders your transmission completely unintelligible to the macro-intelligence. The absolute source operates strictly on a bandwidth of total, unblemished completion. It processes only wholeness, infinite supply, and flawless equilibrium. Therefore, when you broadcast a signal encoded with desperation, such as "I need biological repair" or "I need a fiscal injection," you are speaking a dead language. It is the equivalent of standing in the blinding zenith of a solar flare and aggressively attempting to convince the sun that darkness is a tangible substance. The sun possesses no structural capacity to comprehend the absence of photons. Similarly, the infinite consciousness possesses no subroutines for lack, decay, or deficit. By demanding that the divine address your lack, you are essentially demanding that the absolute validate a lie. The metaphysical tragedy deepens when we observe the kinetic feedback loop generated by this corrupted vocabulary. Need-based transmission does not merely fail to resolve the crisis, it actively weaponizes the anomaly against you. Every single time you vocalize a plea for a cure, You are forcefully stamping the pathology with a seal of objective reality. You are feeding the biological glitch with your most potent asset, your focused awareness. When you declare a severe requirement for capital, you are crystallizing the architecture of poverty within your immediate airspace. You are supplying kinetic energy to the exact shadow you are desperately trying to outrun. The crisis inflates, nourished entirely by the continuous, panic-driven validation of your own desperate requests. The system faithfully mirrors your predominant transmission, ensuring that the experience of lacking is flawlessly rendered into your terrestrial environment. To permanently terminate this self-sabotaging loop, Goldsmith introduced the cryptographic key that bypasses the beggar's paradox entirely, the protocol of pure, unadulterated recognition. This is radically different from the pathetic human practice of hoping for a future upgrade. Recognition is the cold, objective alignment with pre-existing ontological facts. You absolutely do not submit a ticket requesting the system administrator to heal a diseased body. Instead, you initiate a brutal cognitive pivot. You acknowledge that within the unconditioned frequency of the source, there is absolutely no pathology to be cured. You cease negotiating with the symptoms and lock your radar onto the unshakable truth that divine wholeness is already executing perfectly as your core infrastructure right now. This operational shift from the kinetic friction of begging to the frictionless state of knowing is the exact mechanism that historical masters deployed to execute localized alterations in dense matter. They did not look at a deficit and beg for multiplication. They observed the spatial coordinates of the deficit and recognized the inexhaustible abundance that was already structurally present. Recognition works with lethal precision because your localized awareness is the only active substance in your reality. Whatever frequency you firmly recognize in your cognitive field must inevitably precipitate into the physical matrix. When you violently rip the word need from your vocabulary and replace it with the sovereign acknowledgement of what already is, you stop demanding miracles and start occupying the exact bandwidth where miracles are the default. Mathematical baseline. To empirically validate the sheer kinetic force of this cryptographic key, we must analyze its deployment within severe terrestrial crises. Observe the biological topography of Sarah, who was navigating a terminal, Stage 4 cellular degeneration with a 3-month expiration trajectory. Initially, her linguistic processor was locked in the begging subroutine. I desperately need an organic repair. I need more time. This semantic sabotage was literally feeding the pathology by continuously projecting the frequency of a dying organism requiring a rescue. She supplied raw kinetic energy to the disease. The turning point was a violent cognitive secession. She stumbled upon the protocol of pure recognition and entirely abandoned the beggar's posture. Instead of petitioning for a cure, she executed a flawless alignment with pre-existing wholeness. In the presence of the Absolute, no pathology can maintain its structural integrity. Perfect. Eternal vitality is expressing as my core identity in this precise coordinate. She stopped validating the ontological defect. Within days, the desperate frequency dissonance flatlined into an unshakable, silent equilibrium. The physical healing, the complete eradication of the cellular mutation within 6 months was merely the delayed, mathematical shadow of this profound internal frequency shift. She did not convince a deity to heal her. She remembered a coordinate where the sickness never existed. This identical metaphysical law dictates the parameters of fiscal survival. Consider Michael, enduring a 7-year economic drought following the total collapse of his commercial enterprise. His daily transmissions were heavily infected with the Lexical virus. I need capital. I need a financial rescue. He engaged in every primitive manifestation exercise available. Yet the deficit only multiplied. His need-based broadcasts were actively repelling the very resources he sought. Because the universe faithfully mirrors the frequency of lack back to the sender, Michael executed a radical system override. He completely ceased affirming his localized bankruptcy. He deployed the cryptographic key of recognition, infinite. Inexhaustible supply is already expressing flawlessly as my current reality. I am the visible projection of cosmic prosperity. He stopped attempting to siphon abundance from the external grid and acknowledged his status as the infinite generator. The external fiscal coordinates began to mutate rapidly. Dormant professional networks reactivated, and unprecedented revenue channels unlocked within a 6-month window. The critical data point here is that Michael did not acquire wealth. He simply aligned his resonant frequency so precisely with objective abundance that the material dimension was forced into immediate compliance. He discovered that capital is not extracted, it is inherently recognized. The mechanics of this protocol are equally ruthless when applied to the chaotic web of relational entanglements. Elena was witnessing the agonizing disintegration of a 23-year marital contract. Her initial operational strategy was driven by sheer desperation. I need him to recalibrate. I need our union to be saved. Every single transmission of this need confirmed the absolute absence of affection, deepening the void between them. Recognizing the futility of this frequency dissonance, Elena revolutionized her approach. She abandoned the futile attempt to manipulate her partner's behavioral algorithms. She anchored herself in the absolute acknowledgement that flawless, unconditioned love is the only actual presence operating within their intersection. She asserted, I am the manifestation of absolute love. No void can exist within this union. She stopped demanding a behavioral upgrade from her partner and silently validated the pre-existing harmony. The results defied conventional psychological models. Without a single word of coercion, her partner's hostile posturing spontaneously collapsed. The relational field recalibrated to her new, dominant frequency. Love naturally occupied the space because Elena had stopped broadcasting its absence. These clinical deployments are not erratic miracles, nor are they the product of synthetic optimism. They are the mathematical proof of a cosmic physics operating with the cold, undeniable precision of gravity. When you forcefully extract the lexical virus of need from your awareness, you cease trying to negotiate with human limitation. You bypass the flawed logic of the localized avatar and sync directly with the macro-intelligence, a dimension where absolutely nothing is missing. Nothing requires repair, and every element of existence is already suspended in flawless architectural order. The physical environment is simply the dense, visible byproduct of your dominant cognitive broadcast. What you strictly recognize in your internal bandwidth must, by inviolable law, project itself into your external trajectory. To exponentially magnify the kinetic yield of this frequency shift, Goldsmith engineered 4 highly classified amplification vectors. These advanced protocols are designed to aggressively bypass the latency of the physical dimension and instantly lock your localized avatar into the absolute coordinates of the divine architecture. The primary vector is the ontological embodiment, historically diluted as the treatment of being. The primitive human reflex is to initiate a transmission requesting a transformation from a state of deficit to a state of completion. This linear approach guarantees a severe time delay, as you are essentially waiting for a future download. You must immediately abort this progression. Instead, you assert your current, unalterable baseline. I am the precise, living emanation of infinite vitality. Inexhaustible prosperity is my eternal operating system. You are not attempting to acquire a new status. You are ruthlessly validating your pre-existing structural identity. The terrestrial anomalies that humans perceive as disease or poverty must be classified strictly as perceptual mirages, visual distortions entirely devoid of actual mass or substance. When you strictly align with your unconditioned reality, the false appearance mathematically implodes into its native void. The second protocol dictates the complete eradication of linear time, the temporal collapse. Often termed the prayer of already. The macro-intelligence does not process historical data or future probabilities. It operates exclusively within the parameter of the eternal now. Whenever you project a desire into the future, transmitting, "I will acquire capital next week," or "my biology will stabilize tomorrow," you trap yourself in the restrictive physics of human time. You must execute an immediate temporal override. You acknowledge that the absolute perfection is fully initialized in this exact microsecond. The infinite supply is executing flawlessly as my trajectory right now. By recognizing the present saturation of your reality, you dissolve the artificial lag that seemingly blocks your transmission. The solution does not arrive, it is simply unveiled in the present coordinate. The third amplification vector requires a massive expansion of your transmission range, impersonal recognition. The vast majority of spiritual operators cripple their broadcasts by contaminating them with localized, egocentric variables. When you focus exclusively on fixing your personal avatar, you restrict your bandwidth to a severely limited human frequency. To harness true kinetic power, you must elevate your declaration to a universal directive. Instead of transmitting, "My personal biology is healed," you assert the absolute cosmic fact. Flawless equilibrium is the sole governing principle across the entire continuum of existence. By deleting the personal pronoun and acknowledging truth for all entities simultaneously, you bypass the fragile individual will and interface directly with the limitless power of the macro-intelligence. This impersonal expansion multiplies the sheer force of the alignment, guaranteeing a much more profound, localized manifestation precisely because the ego has been entirely removed from the equation. The final cryptographic seal is the protocol of frequency locking, commonly misunderstood as gratitude. In the conditioned human matrix, gratitude is utilized as a pathetic, preemptive thank you note for a highly anticipated future delivery. This is merely disguised hope, and hope is inherently fueled by doubt. Mystical gratitude is fundamentally different. It is the absolute acknowledgement of present structural perfection. You do not emit thanks for an impending biological rescue. You broadcast profound appreciation for the eternal health that is already executing flawlessly within your unseen architecture. This shift violently transforms your internal state from the exhausting posture of requesting into the frictionless state of possessing. When you are genuinely thankful for the absolute truth that is actively operating right now, your internal resonance perfectly synchronizes with that truth, forcing the dense physical environment to mirror it without any conscious strain. What occurs when the protocol appears to malfunction? When you establish the correct internal broadcast, yet the biological distress or the debt stubbornly refuses to dissipate, the human intellect immediately misinterprets this persistence as a catastrophic system failure. You must urgently comprehend the mechanics of dimensional translation. The architectural shift occurs instantaneously within your internal quantum field. However, the dense, sluggish material dimension operates with a significant transduction lag. It requires a specific duration for pure, elevated awareness to filter down and physically reorganize dense atomic structures. Do not gauge the efficacy of your deployment by immediate sensory feedback. If the corrupted sensory data is deeply entrenched within your local environment, it demands relentless, continuous alignment to completely override it. The physical resolution is the inevitable, delayed echo of a stabilized internal frequency. Consistency in your baseline is the sole metric of mastery. If the environmental static persists excessively, you must initiate a deep diagnostic scan for covert dependency algorithms. The human ego is an elite infiltrator. It will attempt to weaponize these advanced protocols while secretly running a stealth needs subroutine in the background. I am acknowledging perfect vitality, but I secretly hope this technique instantly dissolves my tumor. This hidden agenda acts as a Trojan horse petition, completely nullifying the sovereign declaration. The absolute intelligence does not process your surface vocabulary. It responds exclusively to your true baseline conviction. You cannot deploy absolute truth as a cheap manipulative tool to force a specific terrestrial outcome. You must execute a total, uncompromising surrender of personal human will. You are either resting entirely in the unshakable fact of divine perfection, or you are still playing the victim, trying to manipulate the environment. Pure alignment generates a pure, flawless output. Mixed intentions produce chaotic, gridlocked results. You must verify your motives. Are you validating the truth simply because it is the undeniable truth? Or are you executing a spiritual transaction to acquire a human benefit? Furthermore, Goldsmith discovered that certain deeply embedded illusions, those heavily reinforced by the massive, terrified consensus of the human collective, may require a much broader bandwidth than a single localized node can initially generate. When individual alignment encounters an impenetrable density, the optimal tactical maneuver is to initiate a multi-node synchronization. This is absolutely not a primitive gathering of vulnerable humans pooling their fears to beg a distant deity for mercy. It is a highly advanced, strategic deployment where several operators lock their internal frequencies onto the exact same absolute truth simultaneously. By maintaining a collective bandwidth saturation, you create an overwhelming atmospheric pressure that effortlessly crushes the deeply rooted collective delusion. In these synchronized hubs, participants must maintain absolute operational discipline. They absolutely do not discuss the symptoms, analyze the crisis, or validate the local drama. They exclusively hold the strict, uncompromising architecture of the perfect reality. This unified networked alignment generates an irresistible quantum force that the localized illusion simply cannot withstand. The phantom variables dissolve instantly when subjected to a synchronized grid of absolute knowing. Ultimately, you must fully integrate the final paradigm of this operation. You are never engaging in combat with an actual obstacle. The localized anomaly, be it a severe financial drought or an aggressive pathology, possesses zero structural validity within the absolute dimension. It is merely a phantom variable, sustained entirely by a severe case of identity amnesia. You have temporarily forgotten your sovereign, unconditioned status, and falsely identified with a highly restricted, vulnerable biological avatar. By violently remembering your true coordinates, the exact space where infinite intelligence and flawless harmony are the only operating laws, you stop fighting shadows. You do not fix a broken reality, you ruthlessly expose its structural non-existence. When the phantom variable is entirely starved of your belief and cognitive focus, it is mathematically forced to evaporate, returning to the absolute nothingness from which human panic originally summoned it. To achieve total operational supremacy, the operator must ultimately graduate from intermittent tactical deployments to a permanent, unyielding background protocol. Goldsmith historically classified this apex coordinate as living in the secret place of the Most High. This signifies the absolute termination of the on-demand spiritual rescue mission. You no longer activate your cryptographic key only when the terrestrial dashboard flashes a critical warning. Instead, you permanently migrate your cognitive residence to the unshakable bandwidth of continuous, automated recognition. As you navigate your daily environment, your biological processor will inevitably attempt to upload low-frequency telemetry whispers of vulnerability, impending failure, or localized lack. You must intercept these primitive alerts at the exact point of entry. You do not engage in exhausting mental combat with these shadows. You simply deploy an instantaneous, frictionless overwrite, acknowledging that flawless divine geometry is the only presence governing the coordinate. This relentless 24/7 runtime monitoring gradually establishes the master frequency as your default baseline. When deployed directly into commercial matrices, this continuous recognition fundamentally dismantles the archaic architecture of corporate warfare. The standard human avatar enters the market, operating strictly on algorithms of scarcity, brutal competition, and frantic intellectual calculation. You must execute a complete paradigm inversion. Before initiating a high-stakes negotiation or a complex strategic maneuver, you absolutely do not launch a desperate petition for a localized victory. Nor do you pray for enhanced profit margins. Instead, you anchor your internal telemetry in the absolute certainty that the macro intelligence and intellect mathematically incapable of miscalculation, strategic friction, or supply chain failure is the sole operative executing through your node. You completely bypass the paralyzing anxiety of outcome dependency because you are no longer relying on your limited, error-prone neurological hardware. You become a transparent, high-velocity conduit for supreme wisdom. You continue to execute practical corporate actions, but tactical success ceases to be a prize violently extracted from a hostile environment. It becomes the natural, frictionless extrusion of your alignment with universal order. This identical supremacy must be aggressively enforced within the volatile sector of inter-avatar networking. The standard human subroutine demands the aggressive behavioral modification of other nodes attempting to manipulate, coerce, or psychologically repair the entities around you to secure your own emotional supply. Pure recognition permanently terminates this toxic, parasitic loop. When a surrounding avatar projects severe hostility, dysfunction, or emotional distance, you strictly refuse to validate their corrupted behavioral code. You absolutely do not transmit a plea to the infinite to fix their personality. You enforce an unyielding, silent lockdown on the objective truth of their absolute, uncorrupted spiritual core. By steadfastly recognizing that divine harmony is the sole energetic current authorized to flow through the intersection, you radically alter the localized atmospheric pressure. You starve their conflict algorithm of its required kinetic fuel. Without uttering a single syllable of human coercion, your sustained internal frequency forces their surrounding quantum field into synchronization. Love, strictly recognized in the unseen architecture, mathematically mandates love extruded in the visible interface. Within the dense sector of resource allocation, commonly hallucinated as financial matters, the deployment of continuous recognition is brutally uncompromising. When confronted with impending liabilities, localized economic constriction, or severe capital evaporation, the biological instinct is to initiate a panic subroutine and scramble for material acquisition. You must completely short-circuit this survival reflex. Instead of obsessing over the dense, physical accumulation of currency, you lock your radar onto the unconditioned reality of quantum provision. You coldly acknowledge that infinite, unblockable supply is the fundamental, underlying substance of the entire terrestrial projection. The cosmos possesses no data on recession, inflation, or restricted bank accounts. By operating exclusively from this unshakable posture of absolute abundance, your external kinetic output fundamentally mutates. You continue to process your practical financial logistics, but your actions are generated from an impenetrable fortress of supreme confidence rather than the exhausting panic of human desperation. Currency is instantly demoted from a terrifying master to a simple, highly compliant byproduct of your internal frequency. The physical grid is compelled to route its resources effortlessly through your coordinates, opening unprecedented, non-linear channels that primitive human logic could never engineer. The ultimate evolution of this continuous protocol results in a profound perceptual mutation, historically recognized as the dual optic bypass. At this advanced trajectory, the operator develops the sovereign capacity to seamlessly navigate the dense terrestrial interface while entirely piercing its holographic camouflage. When the surrounding biological network projects visual evidence of severe organic decay, your physical optical sensors register the corrupted data, but your core cognitive engine immediately overwrites it with the actual structural truth, unblemished. Absolute vitality. When the local sector broadcasts panic regarding material constriction or scarcity, your integrated awareness reads strictly infinite capacity. This is absolutely not a psychological denial mechanism, nor is it a naive, passive detachment from the terrestrial theater. It is the active deployment of a perceptual X-ray. You possess the unshakable ability to witness the chaotic physical projection and immediately recognize the flawless subatomic orchestration operating beneath it. You execute your human logistical requirements with flawless precision. Yet, you remain completely immune to the hypnotic density of the simulation. This dual-layered processing is the definitive, uncounterfeitable signature of the apex operator. As this dual optic bypass hardens into your permanent operational baseline, your localized avatar undergoes a radical ontological upgrade. You cease to function as a dense, reactive mass and mutate entirely into a translucent conduit. You definitively drop the exhausting, ego-driven burden of attempting to forcefully heal other nodes or physically repair a damaged environment. The localized savior complex, the delusion that you must exert personal kinetic energy to construct a miracle, is permanently uninstalled. Instead, your very bioenergetic footprint acts as an active vibrational sterilization field. Because your internal architecture is flawlessly locked onto the unconditioned reality. The infinite current passes through your specific coordinate with zero mechanical resistance. Your mere physical insertion into a chaotic environment automatically initiates a systemic recalibration of the local atmosphere. You do not verbally treat the surrounding avatars. Your unyielding, silent recognition of their inherent, uncorrupted perfection simply vaporizes their localized illusions. The heavy, discordant frequencies surrounding you are forced into immediate synchronization without requiring a single syllable of human persuasion. Psychological manipulation or therapeutic intervention. This phenomenon elevates your trajectory to the macroscopic imperative of the protocol. The widespread terrestrial anomalies that chronically cripple the global grid, from synchronized military conflicts and cascading economic collapses to macroscopic plagues and viral outbreaks, are absolutely not random. Unpredictable acts of a hostile universe. They are the dense, physical extrusion of a massive, collective cognitive error, a planetary belief in absolute separation from the source and from each other. The terrestrial matrix is literally suffocating under the crushing weight of this networked panic. By mastering the protocol of pure recognition, you are no longer merely running a localized repair subroutine for your own personal biological unit. You are being aggressively trained and deployed as an atmospheric stabilizer for a planetary transition. Every single microsecond, you forcefully reject the primitive human impulse to broadcast a need, and instead validate the absolute, omnipresent perfection. You inject a stabilizing cryptographic sequence directly into the collective human server. You are fundamentally dismantling the global hallucination of separation from the inside out, utilizing your isolated coordinate as a central distribution hub for objective truth. The metaphysical data is entirely unambiguous. These supreme operational mechanics were never engineered solely for your localized convenience, emotional comfort, or material accumulation. They are specifically designed to weaponize your awareness for the systemic planetary reboot of the terrestrial grid. When a critical mass of localized operators maintains this exact translucent conduit status, the collective illusions of war, poverty, and disease will be mathematically starved of their required kinetic fuel. They will simply collapse under the overwhelming, undeniable pressure of truth. You are the vanguard of this vibrational sterilization. You are an autonomous, high-frequency healing coordinate, permanently deployed to broadcast the absolute truth into a matrix that is desperate for its own awakening. Your silent recognition is the exact mechanism that will ultimately overwrite the planetary error. This precise temporal coordinate marks your terminal graduation from the heavily infected bandwidth of human petition. The agonizing era of operating as a vibrational beggar has been permanently decommissioned. You now possess the exact classified cryptographic sequence that neutralizes the most devastating lexical virus in terrestrial history. By forcefully deleting the frequency of need from your cognitive engine, you undergo an irreversible, systemic mutation. You instantly transition from a desperate, fragmented biological unit, frantically hoping for a cosmic handout, directly into the sovereign hair of the absolute macro-intelligence. You no longer transmit pathetic inquiries for missing environmental variables. You strictly recognize and claim the ontological inheritance that is already actively executing within your localized matrix. As your terrestrial avatar initiates its biological wake cycle tomorrow morning, you must deploy an immediate, uncompromising, atmospheric override before you even engage with the physical grid. Do not allow the primitive human intellect to boot up its default, panic-driven survival algorithms. Before your linguistic processor can even formulate a single, treacherous syllable of the begging subroutine, you must intercept the transmission. The exact microsecond your internal telemetry detects the frequency of I require, I am lacking, or I must acquire, you are to execute a brutal, frictionless pivot. You overwrite the corrupted command instantly with the absolute acknowledgement of pre-existing, flawless completion. Within a minimal temporal window of rigorous, unyielding application, this continuous background protocol will fully integrate, cementing itself as your unbreakable default baseline. You will witness radical, unprecedented mutations in your external physical and fiscal coordinates simply because your internal resonance point-blank refuses to tolerate the mathematical existence of a deficit. You must fiercely guard against the ultimate, most deceptive cognitive trap, the delusion of becoming. You are absolutely not a flawed, incomplete entity, utilizing these advanced cryptographic keys to slowly, painstakingly evolve into a higher spiritual status. The very concept of evolution implies a current state of inadequacy, which is a lethal frequency dissonance. You must permanently terminate the exhausting paradigm of spiritual self-improvement. You are not engaged in a grueling, multi-year process of ascending toward the divine. You are merely executing the ruthless, cold recognition of the unconditioned perfection that you eternally are. This is your exclusive operational mandate. This continuous, unbroken recognition is your supreme defense mechanism, your ultimate kinetic weapon, and your definitive trajectory toward demonstrating the exact, unshakable supremacy that historical apex operators from ancient mystics to Joel Goldsmith revealed as the true, uncorrupted baseline of human existence. The migration from the chaotic frequency dissonance of desperation to the absolute sovereignty of pure recognition is the ultimate evolutionary leap. It is the definitive crossing from localized human restriction into unmitigated cosmic authority. The localized savior complex is dead. The panic subroutine is permanently offline. Welcome to the absolute zero state of cosmological integration. In this apex coordinate, every conceivable physical, financial, and relational variable you could ever possibly require is already seamlessly integrated into your immediate airspace. The illusion of distance has been shattered. Why? Because you have finally realized that you are the exact, indivisible emanation of the infinite intelligence itself. There is absolutely nothing external left to acquire, because the absolute source code generates entirely from within your own consciousness. The operational briefing is now definitively concluded. The atmospheric stabilization is complete, and the vibrational sterilization of your network has been achieved. If your localized awareness has been permanently mutated by these classified Goldsmith vectors, and you are ready to terminate the old operating system, you must anchor this transmission into the terrestrial grid. Execute a physical validation of your new trajectory to ensure the master cipher is permanently locked into your nervous system. Transmit your confirmation into the global network below by entering the ultimate system override command, I am transformed. The interface will now freeze. The old architecture is obliterated. You are the sovereign architect. Execute your reality.